I'm Sarah, a 34-year-old teacher living in a small, peaceful town with my husband, Mark, and our 3-year-old son, Ben. Life had always been simple for us. Busy days at work, cozy dinners at home, and long weekends spent at the park. We'd built a quiet, happy life together, or so I thought. About a year ago, everything changed when Mark's mother, Diane, moved in with us. Diane had recently retired and wanted to be closer to family. At first, I was relieved. She was always offering to watch Ben, giving me some much-needed breaks from the chaos of raising a toddler. Diane was charming and generous, and she seemed so eager to be a part of Ben's life. In those early days, I tried to ignore the small red flags. Diane had a way of correcting Ben that felt a little too harsh, like scolding him for not eating fast enough or for spilling juice on the carpet. She'd sigh dramatically and say, "Sarah, you need to toughen up. This boy is going to grow up spoiled if you keep coddling him." I told myself she meant well, that maybe I really was too soft. After all, Mark didn't seem to mind, so maybe I was just overreacting. But then I started noticing little things that sent chills down my spine. Ben would flinch when Diane raised her voice, and he'd retreat to his room whenever she entered. He stopped singing his silly songs and spent more time hugging his stuffed bear tightly to his chest. At night, he'd wake up crying, whispering words I couldn't understand, shaking so hard it broke my heart. One rainy afternoon, I was stirring a pot of soup in the kitchen when Ben shuffled in, his head down and his fingers twisting nervously in his shirt. "Mommy, Grandma locked me in the closet," he said in a small, frightened voice. My heart stopped. I turned off the stove and knelt in front of him, trying to keep my hands steady. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Ben wouldn't say more. He just leaned into me, burying his face in my shoulder like he was trying to hide from the world. I held him close, my mind spinning. Every instinct in me screamed that this wasn't just a misunderstanding. My sweet boy didn't lie, and the fear in his voice was too real to ignore. Mark brushed it off when I told him later, saying that Ben probably misunderstood something Diane said. But I knew my son. I knew I couldn't let this go. That night, as I lay in bed with Ben curled up next to me, I promised myself that I would find out the truth, no matter what it took, no matter how much it might hurt. I had to protect my son. I had to uncover what Diane was hiding. The days after Ben's confession felt like a waking nightmare. I'd catch Diane humming sweet little songs in the kitchen, acting like the perfect grandmother. But every time I looked at her, my mind was stuck on those words. Grandma locked me in the closet. The more I watched her, the more I saw tiny glimpses of something darker. I started to notice how she'd correct Ben for every tiny thing. If he dropped a crumb, she'd scold him like he'd broken a priceless vase. If he dared to answer back, even in his tiny toddler voice, she'd give him this cold, hard stare that would shut him up instantly. And then, just like that, she'd turn to me and smile, pretending nothing had happened. I tried to talk to Mark again, but he refused to see it. "You're overreacting," he said, his eyes tired and distant. "Mom's just trying to help. You're letting your imagination run wild." I wanted to scream at him, to shake him and make him see. But I couldn't. So I kept my fears to myself, swallowing them down and feeling them grow inside me like a sickness. One evening, I walked into the living room to see Diane holding Ben's shoulders a little too tight. Her nails were digging into his skin, but her voice was syrupy sweet. "You have to listen to Grandma, okay?" she was saying, her tone calm but her eyes sharp. When she saw me, she let go of Ben and gave me that same warm smile. "Oh, Sarah, I was just helping him learn some manners." Ben wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stood there, his little hands clenched at his sides. That night, I lay awake for hours, listening to the rain tapping against the window and wondering how much of this had been going on behind my back. I felt like a stranger in my own home. The next morning, I made up my mind. I ordered a tiny nanny cam online and set it up in the living room. hidden among the books on the shelf. My hands were shaking as I did it. Part of me felt like a traitor, like I was betraying Mark and his mother. But I knew I had no choice. I had to protect my son, no matter what. Each day after that, I'd watch Diane closely, my stomach in knots. I'd replay those quiet moments, listening for the tone of her voice, the look in her eyes. And every time Ben flinched or looked away, I felt a surge of anger and guilt. I didn't know what the camera would find, but I knew I had to see it. I had to know the truth, because the thought of not knowing was worse than any lie. Setting up the hidden camera was one of the most difficult decisions I've ever made. Every time I pressed play on the recordings, my heart clenched tighter. What I saw was far worse than I'd imagined. Diane wasn't just a stern grandmother, she was downright cruel. She yelled at Ben with a sharpness that made my stomach churn. She locked him in rooms for hours, punishing him in ways no child should ever endure. Watching Ben flinch at her voice, shrinking away as if he wanted to disappear, broke something deep inside me. One night, the footage caught Diane locking Ben in the bathroom. I saw him press his tiny hands against the door, his face wet with tears. His whispered voice, barely audible, said, "Mommy, please let me out." My chest tightened so much I thought I might suffocate. At that moment, I felt completely powerless, watching. My son trapped, scared, and alone, unable to reach out and protect him. The helplessness was overwhelming, but it ignited a fierce determination in me. I had to do whatever it took to keep him safe. That evening, I waited until Ben was asleep before I showed Mark the videos. At first, he refused to watch. I could see the denial in his eyes. It was as if accepting the truth would shatter the life he knew, but I was persistent. Slowly, reluctantly, he pressed play. The room was silent except for the muffled sounds from the screen. When it ended, his face was pale and his eyes heavy with sorrow. There was no anger, only a deep sadness that seemed to crush him from within. Mark admitted that Diane had always been difficult to read, but no one ever imagined she was capable of this. He felt betrayed, and so did I. But there was no turning back now. We both understood that Diane's mask had finally been pulled away. From this point on, our priority was clear: protecting Ben and healing the wounds Diane had inflicted on our family. I knew this was only the beginning. There were hard conversations ahead, investigations, and maybe even court battles. But for the first time since all this started, I felt a glimmer of hope, because the truth was out, and the truth was the first step toward freedom. The shock from discovering Diane's abuse towards Ben was only the beginning. I felt a heavy weight settle in my chest, knowing there was more to her story, something buried deep that no one had dared to uncover. So I quietly started asking around, gently probing family members and old acquaintances, careful not to raise suspicion or cause a fight. What I found shook me to my core. Mark's older sister, Rachel, had been a secret victim of Diane's cruelty for years. Hearing Rachel's story felt like stepping into a shadow I never knew existed. She spoke with a quiet pain, telling me about years of emotional torment that shaped her entire childhood. Diane wasn't just harsh. She was controlling, manipulative, and emotionally abusive in ways that left invisible scars. Rachel described how Diane would isolate her from the family, constantly criticize her every move, and tear down her confidence until Rachel felt worthless. Diane's abuse wasn't just about harsh words or discipline. It was a calculated effort to break Rachel's spirit, to control her life completely. Rachel recalled moments when Diane humiliated her in front of relatives, made cruel jokes at her expense, and punished her for even the smallest mistakes, leaving her feeling scared and alone. Listening to Rachel, I could see the deep wounds Diane had caused, wounds that had never healed. I thought of Ben, trapped in a similar nightmare, and my heart ached with fear and anger. This was a pattern, a cycle of abuse that Diane had perfected over years, and I was determined to break it. I reached out to Rachel, and after hours of talking and crying, she agreed to stand with us. She was ready to share her story publicly, to confront Diane's cruelty head-on, and to finally bring the truth out of the shadows. Her courage gave me hope. With Rachel's testimony and the hidden footage I'd captured, we were building a case strong enough to show the world Diane's true face. It wouldn't be easy. There would be battles ahead, but I was ready to fight. For Ben, for Rachel, and for the chance to finally end the silence. Once Rachel agreed to stand with us, everything suddenly moved faster than I could have expected. We found a compassionate lawyer who specialized in family law and child protection cases. From the moment we hired her, I realized this was going to be a long and painful journey. Not just paperwork and court dates, but reliving every moment of fear, pain, and betrayal that Diane had inflicted on Ben and Rachel. Preparing for the trial took an emotional toll on all of us. I spent countless sleepless nights going over the videos, making sure everything was clear and documented. Rachel and I spent hours talking, strengthening each other's courage. I knew that telling our stories in court would open old wounds, but it was the only way to stop Diane's cycle of abuse and protect Ben's future. Explaining everything to Ben was one of the hardest things I've ever done. How do you tell a child that the person who was supposed to love and care for him was hurting him? I sat down with him gently in a quiet room and promised that from now on, he would be safe and loved, no matter what. I saw his little hands tremble as he held mine, but in his eyes, I saw a spark of trust and hope. That moment steeled my resolve. I would fight for him with everything I had. When the day of the trial finally came, my heart pounded with a mixture of fear and hope. In the courtroom, Rachel spoke first. Her voice was steady but filled with emotion, as she recounted years of emotional abuse and manipulation at Diane's hands. She spoke not just for herself, but for Ben, and for every victim who had been silenced. Then, the videos we had gathered played. Watching Diane's cold, harsh behavior unfold on the screen was both painful and necessary. The footage revealed the reality Diane had tried so hard to hide, a truth that no one could deny. The judge listened intently, weighing every word and every piece of evidence. After what felt like an eternity, the verdict was announced. Diane was found guilty of child abuse. She was sentenced to prison, and a restraining order was put in place to protect Ben from any further contact. Hearing the verdict was like a heavy weight lifting from my chest. For the first time in months, I felt a cautious relief. Justice had been served, and I knew that finally, Ben could begin to heal in a safe environment. But I also knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Healing from trauma takes time, and we had to rebuild trust, love, and safety in our home. Still, with the truth on our side, I was ready to face whatever came next. For Ben, for Rachel, and for myself. The court verdict was just the start of a long journey towards healing. After Diane was sentenced, we focused all our energy on helping Ben recover from the trauma. We found a skilled child therapist who specialized in working with children who had experienced abuse and emotional neglect. At first, Ben was scared and withdrawn, clutching my hand tightly whenever we walked into the therapy room. He barely spoke, choosing instead to communicate through his drawings and play. It was heartbreaking, but also hopeful. He was beginning to express what words couldn't capture. Week by week, I saw changes. Ben started to smile more often, his laughter returning like rays of sunshine after a storm. He'd tell small stories about his day at the park or the games he played with his friends. Some days were harder than others. He'd suddenly become upset or scared without explanation, and we'd all have to take a step back and be patient. Mark and I learned to listen more, to hold space for Ben's feelings without rushing to fix everything. We understood that healing wasn't a straight line. It was messy, slow, and full of ups and downs. At home, We created a safe and loving environment. We made new family traditions, like Sunday pancake mornings and evening story times, to rebuild trust and happiness. Mark and I attended counseling together to strengthen our relationship and learn how to support Ben better. We promised each other that we would always protect our son, no matter what, and that nothing would come between us again. I also took time to heal. The weight of guilt and fear had been heavy, but slowly, I started forgiving myself for not seeing the signs sooner. I reminded myself that I had done everything I could to protect Ben once I knew the truth. Writing in my journal, talking with close friends, and leaning on therapy helped me process the pain and find strength. Looking back, I realized how far we'd come. The darkness Diane brought into our lives was still there in the shadows, but it no longer controlled us. We were moving forward, stronger, closer, and more united than ever. For the first time in a long while, I felt a genuine sense of hope. Hope that Ben's future would be bright. Hope that our family could finally live free from fear, and hope that truth, no matter how painful, was the key to healing. Months had slipped by since the courtroom battle ended, but in those months, something profound had happened. Ben was healing. Each day, I watched my little boy grow stronger, reclaiming pieces of his childhood that had once seemed lost forever. The haunted look in his eyes softened and gave way to light, a light that flickered at first, then burned steadily brighter with every laugh, every smile, every tiny victory. Thorstein. First time he ran free in the park without hesitation was a moment etched into my heart. I remember how his laughter filled the air, pure and unrestrained, as he chased butterflies and kicked at fallen leaves. Those moments were a beautiful contrast to the fear and silence that had once gripped our home. At night, when he whispered, "I love you, Mommy," those words became my strength, the reassurance that love could heal even the deepest wounds. Therapy was a difficult road. Ben was hesitant at first, withdrawing into silence or using drawings to tell his story instead of words. But week by week, session by session, he grew more confident. He learned to trust again, not only in me and Mark, but in the world around him. I saw him make friends, discover new passions like drawing and soccer, and dream openly about the future. There were setbacks, dark days when shadows of the past threatened to return, but together we faced them with patience and love. Mark and I too were healing. The months of pain and fear had tested our marriage in ways I never imagined, but they also brought us closer. We learned to communicate honestly and openly, sharing our fears, hopes, and dreams without shame or judgment. We rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of trust, compassion, and unwavering support. Together, we promised to protect Ben and each other, no matter what came our way. I took time to heal too. The guilt and fear weighed heavily on me, but slowly I learned to forgive myself for what I hadn't seen sooner. I found solace in writing, in therapy, and in the support of close friends. The pain would never fully disappear, but I was learning to carry it with grace, turning it into strength. Looking back, Diane's cruelty left scars, deep and lasting ones, but it also revealed the resilience within us. We had been broken, but never defeated. In our survival, we found a freedom that no darkness could take away. One quiet evening, I sat beside Mark on the couch, watching Ben play with his toys on the floor. The soft glow of the lamp cast warm shadows around the room. We shared a glance, full of gratitude, relief, and hope. We had endured so much, lost a part of our innocence, but gained something precious, a chance to start anew. The road ahead would have its challenges. Healing is never a straight path. But we were ready. Stronger, braver, and more united than ever before. Diane's shadow could no longer touch us. We had taken back our lives, our joy, and our peace. As Ben's laughter echoed around the room, I felt a deep calm settle over me. The darkest chapter of our lives was behind us. With open hearts, we stepped forward into a new dawn, one filled with love, light, and endless possibilities.